Okay, everyone, welcome home. It's getting harder to say welcome home in an environment that is treating us like we are on foreign territory. Completely shocked by the rapid pace, not necessarily the rulings, but the rapid pace in which we are seeing the Supreme Court undo voting rights, undo the protections of civil and human rights in this country. We just got news, of course, last night that in West Allen, Alabama Secretary of State versus Marcus Castor, that they have agreed, the Supreme Court has allowed Alabama to proceed with the original maps before there was a court order redrawing districts to ensure that Terry Sewell, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, and Shamari Figures, who is a new member of Congress serving his first term, would both be able to have seats in Alabama, a place that has a huge Black population. Well, the Supreme Court just yesterday says, you know what? We're going to go back to how things were. We're going to go back to the original maps before the court order. And we are going to do that despite the fact that on Tuesday, May 19th, an election for which ballots are already printed that have Terry Sewell's name on them, that have Shamari Figure's name on them, despite the fact that people have already early voted, despite the fact that folks who receive absentee ballots, despite the fact that military officials who are overseas have their ballots, have probably already cast their ballots, have probably already mailed in their ballots, right? Have voted. What this country is doing to voting is something that is an abomination to us all. Our ancestors are rolling over in their graves. And yes, white folks, even yours, as you seek to protect and defend democracy, as you fight for liberty and justice for all, particularly in this hour, your ancestors too have to be rolling over in their graves. Unless they were the Confederates, then maybe they celebrate. Maybe they're celebrating. But speaking of the Confederates, I also want to turn our attention to Louisiana. What is important to know in this moment is that Memphis no longer has a majority Black district. There was one majority minority district in all of Tennessee. We can get to the demographics of these states shortly. Maybe somebody on our team can pull them up. What's the Black population in Tennessee? What is it in South Carolina? What is it in Louisiana? What is it in Mississippi? What is it in Alabama? We should know these things. But the only Black district in all of Tennessee, the state legislature last week acted in alignment with what the Supreme Court ruled in Louisiana versus Calais. Calais, by the way, was an insurrectionist who was on Capitol Hill on January 6th being a terrorist. Has a Supreme Court decision in his name now where they have decided that they would side with the Confederates, where they would side with white nationalists, where they would side with white supremacists, and strip us of our voting power, diluting our voices in congressional races. So here we have it. Louisiana said, hold my beer. Their election is on Saturday. Alabama, as I said, is on Tuesday, but Louisiana's election is Saturday. It is this coming Saturday. Again, just like Alabama, ballots have gone out. These members of Congress, Troy Carter, Cleo Fields, who fought for decades to ensure that Baton Rouge would have a Black voice in Congress, hasn't been there long at all. Seat is now stripped, most likely. They have until June 1st in Louisiana to come up with a congressional map that makes sense. Long after this Saturday primary, long after these politicians who say they're protecting democracy and clutching their pearls at voter fraud that does not freaking exist, are creating the environment for electoral dysfunction, for voter suppression, and for people to have their voices counted not once but twice, and then a third time if you count the general election. So in Louisiana, this is what Governor Landry had to say when he appeared on CBS 60 Minutes. Let's listen.
We get equal rights. No one gets extra rights.
This past Tuesday, we went to Baton Rouge and met Governor Jeff Landry at the governor's mansion. A close ally of President Trump, he dominates Louisiana politics. The colorful, conservative Cajun was the state's attorney general before winning the top job in 2023.
You cannot say that we are all created equal and that states must treat everyone equal under the law and then allow a law to sort people based upon race.
Following the Supreme Court decision, Governor Landry declared a state of emergency and abruptly suspended congressional House primaries right as voting was starting, ordering a do-over at a future date, leaving voters dazed and confused. You declared a state of emergency. What exactly is the emergency?
We've got
Exactly.
the highest court of the land says the map that you have is unconstitutional, so we don't have a map under which our voters can vote on.
This country has held elections during the Civil War, during 2 world wars. Elections still went on.
We're going to have an election, and we're actually going to have an election on Election Day.
But voting was already happening. As we sit here right now, more than 45,000 ballots have been returned. What happens to those?
Oh, those ballots are discarded, and those voters will vote again in November.
You say that like it's not a big deal.
Well, it's not a big deal. It's not my fault. Go, if anybody has a grievance, take it to the United States Supreme Court.
It's not my fault. But what is your fault, Governor Landry, is the fact that you called a state of emergency to suspend an election, or at least part of an election, when there is no emergency. You said they are going to vote twice. They're actually not going to vote twice, because you have to have another election where they vote for their representative of not choice, but force, because their representatives of choice are Cleo Fields and Troy Carter. And now one of them will be out of a seat. So it actually is absolutely your fault. You do have the ability to do something. And the people of Louisiana are speaking back. They're saying, you're saying it's not your fault. Well, we say recall. And so what has to happen now is there have to be consequences for when people exact harm on the Black community. You are diluting votes. You are siding with white supremacists, with Confederate mentality, to strip us of our voting power. And so I think that is what's important. Thank you all. I'm seeing a lot of your comments. Somebody said, I love angry Angela. I am so angry, but really it is deep grief, because I don't believe that we deserve to go backwards in this moment. There is someone who's been fighting on the Senate Government Affairs Committee in Louisiana. He is the nephew of Congressman Troy Carter. His name is Senator Gary Carter. And I want you all to hear the very righteous protest he engaged in a committee hearing, where he asked a very simple question. He said, the Secretary of State is always here for a hearing. Where are you today, sir? Let's roll the clip.
The reason why we're here today is because there's a suspension of ongoing congressional elections. And so I guess before we start the agenda, I'd like to hear from the Secretary of State or someone from the Secretary of State's office.
Nobody is here from the Secretary of State's office.
Well, as chair of the committee, I have some very important questions that I would like to be addressed. We have an ongoing election for Congress, and at the time the Secretary of State issued a statement declaring an emergency, I would like to know how many people have requested early ballots. Do you have that information, Mr. Chairman? How many people have requested early ballots?
Senator Carter, I have not, but have you reached out to the Secretary of State before this meeting?
I can't recall a meeting of the Senate Government and Affairs Committee where someone from the Secretary of State office has not been sitting off to the side. So it was my expectation that the Secretary of State would be in this committee meeting. We need to know, quite honestly, how many people had voted at the time the governor suspended the election, and what happened to those ballots. Are those ballots being preserved somewhere? Are those ballots being counted? Can you tell me, Mr. Chairman, how many people had voted at the time the governor has suspended Louisiana's congressional elections?
No, I cannot.
But there's already an ongoing election regarding congressional maps that are in place. And my simple question is, what's the status of those votes that's already been cast? Are those votes going to be counted, or are they going to be discarded? Simple question.
Senator Carter, I can't answer that question.
My first question was about the votes that were already cast before he issued the suspension.
We can go ahead and take a recess right now.
Why? I only asked like 2 questions. Mr. Chairman, as I was saying before our break, I want to know from the Secretary of State's office, and I demand to know before the next meeting. Is my understanding this committee is going to meet Wednesday of next week?
That's correct.
And I expect the Secretary of State
another time, Derek. We can go ahead. Thank you. I was trying to get your attention. I want people to see that clip. We'll make sure that we put that up on social. Again, Gary Carter was holding the line. He was pushing for the Secretary of State to answer what happens to these people who've cast their ballots. It is so important that legal advocates across states are paying attention to the disenfranchisement of voters. Of course, there are people like Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court who would argue, well, they're voting on something that's unconstitutional anyway. On what basis, sir? On what basis? If there is representation, there is taxation included in the Constitution. There was nothing that allowed for you all to gerrymander in a partisan way districts, and certainly not by disenfranchising Black voters. Now, you could say, Clarence, I'm trying to go back to when Black people, particularly in the South, were counted as a part of the 3/5 compromise for the purposes of representation and taxation. You can do that. You can do that. But you're going to burn in hot, fiery hell. You will burn in hot, fiery hell for that, because what you're doing is disenfranchising people of your same hue, sir. What is the justification for that? The Constitution should never be something that is interpreted word for word without the idea that Black people would one day be liberated. Now, Clarence Thomas is what they call, from constitutional law scholars, a strict constructionist. That means he wants it to be interpreted word for word, letter for letter. Whatever the framers meant, whatever they wrote, he wants to interpret it in that very strict way. The problem is, Clarence's ass wouldn't have been on the bench. He would not have been on the bench if he interpreted it word for word. So what he does is he tries to apply it to us one way, and he gives himself an out another way. We're not here for that. But I want to lean in here. We have some comments coming in. One that I really, really appreciate is this question from Kinlon. I hope I say your name right. Jones, thank you so much. He says, Sis Angela, worst case scenario, where do you see things in the next 10 years? Kinlon, I'm trying to get through the next 10 days, the next 10 months. And what I think we really have to understand, we are rapidly approaching this country's 250th anniversary, 250th birthday. The Declaration of Independence, the anniversary they celebrate is July 4th, 1776. Well, Frederick Douglass asked us, what to the slave is the 4th of July? We got to ask the same question. What to the enslaved person's descendant is the 4th of July? If they are denying us independence, if they are denying us our ability to select representatives of our choosing, what is this holiday to us really? What should it be? And then the question we have to ask ourselves is, if this government does not seek to represent us, it is not beneficial to us, what is our place in it really? Sure, we need people inside. We need an outside strategy, but we are rapidly being pushed outside. And you're seeing it so much so that our elders had to go into a hearing in the Louisiana State House and Senate to remind people that it was a mere 61 years ago where Bloody Sunday happened. It was a mere 61 years ago where Lyndon B. Johnson was forced to sign the Voting Rights Act into law. It was not that long ago. That is my parents' lifetime, y'all. Seriously. So let's hear from some of our elders. I'm going to bring up the clip from Miss Leona Tate.
Understand what it feels like to stand here, to have walked through that mob as a child, and to now watch elected officials do that same thing that the mob was trying to do, just with better suits and a parliamentary procedure. I'm Leona Tate. On November 14 in 1960, I, along with two other 6-year-old girls, walked through an angry mob to integrate McDonough 19 Elementary School in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans. I was one of the McDonough Three, along with Tessie Prevost and Gail Etienne. We became part of history because our parents believed that we deserved an equal education, that we deserved dignity, and that we deserved a future without the chains of segregation. I went through something no child should go through to desegregate our state And now, 65 years later, I'm watching as lawmakers attempt to go backwards and segregate us once again through disgraceful voting maps. Many of the supporters of this action seem to think the people believe them when they argue this is not about race. Let me be clear. None of us believe that. Race and partnership are deeply tied, particularly in Louisiana and the South. And I'm not going to give you all a history lesson to explain why. So now we move backwards with a Supreme Court decision that will go down as one of the most racist rulings in our nation's history. A decision that tells Black Louisianans that the representation we earned, that we marched for, that we bled for, can simply be drawn away by politicians with a pen.
Can simply be taken away from by a politician with a pen. This is a woman that had to endure near death to integrate a school. And she is reminding us of what it is like to be disenfranchised, to be excluded, to be treated as invisible, to be the courageous one. We've integrated our political systems to ensure that people who think like us and represent our best interests are present. I really want us to walk this through. There are a lot of folks who are like, I don't vote, I don't care. What is redistricting? What is gerrymandering? What are all these big words? What does it mean to dilute a district? Let me tell you what it means to not have people who think like you passing laws that represent your best interest. Southern University, Xavier, Dillard, if they get any state-based funding, no longer have advocates to ensure that they even get a modicum of what they would normally get. They're definitely not getting on par with other schools that are traditionally white institutions. They're not even getting the money that they are supposed to get, particularly Southern, from the state. They are inadequately funded. What it means to not have people who think like you in higher office is you may not get the wages you deserve. You may not get the additional government benefits that you deserve. When the midterms come and go and they cut SNAP and Medicare and Medicaid, you don't get the health care or the food you deserve it to have access to. And you have no vocal champion, because let me tell you something, to be very clear. They went for Congress now. The state legislators are absolutely next. These people have no floor. There is no floor. And we're busy fighting them on their terms. And we've not even taken the moment, the time to think about what is their bottom. How low will they go? Right? Former First Lady Obama said, when they go low, we go high. Damn that. We got to go meet them in the basement to figure out where they are and how low they will go. They hold the keys to the power of this infrastructure, this system that our hard-earned tax-paying dollars pay into. They hold the keys. We got to go get the keys. There are another number of comments that hopefully we can put up. There's one that says, don't kill me, y'all, but I have read Clarence Thomas's book and I kind of understand him. The only thing is he has been obviously corrupt for past 10 years, but his earlier years, he was a Democrat. Well, he's changed and he's gone to hell in a handbasket. Shout out to Jenny, who's also a member of the Tea Party. Jenny would be his wife. Next, we want to hear from Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who was a tremendous advocate, fighter on a rescue mission during Hurricane Katrina, will forever be a legend in many of our eyes. But Lieutenant General Honore also went to testify before this committee last week. Let's hear what he had to say.
Pankapee Parish by way of St. Charles Parish and the Destrehan Plantation. I will not speak to the details of that journey, but because of the public schools of Louisiana, I got educated to a point and made it to Southern University and spent 37 years in the United States Army defending this nation abroad and at home. What this topic brings up stirs memories of the past. A past where I caught a bus at 6:10 in the morning to go to a school at New Roads and there was a school a mile from my house. The Supreme Court don't always get it right, because at that time it said separate but equal was good enough. And I got on that bus and passed that school a mile from my house to go a way through cane fields and cotton fields and make my way to New Road to go to school for 4 years, because the Supreme Court said separate but equal. They don't always get it right, and they didn't get it right until the issue was redressed years later. I graduated from high school in '66, and the mantra is we'll be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And the state constantly made improvements. And I was proud to come back to this state in 2009, to move back home, to volunteer here, to be a part of a place to help improve the state.
And again, Russell Honore has done so much for Louisiana, but there he's talking about what it's like to be bussed way past your house, to be inconvenienced, to go learn. That was not that long ago. He's talking about the importance of understanding that he just graduated from high school in 1966. That's a year after the Voting Rights Act became law. There's another comment. Why do other people think we have been voting forever? The Voting Rights Act is around 60 years old. My grandmother couldn't vote. I don't know why people think that. I think they probably believe because it was enshrined in the Constitution with the 13th Amendment. But what they don't understand is that didn't apply to women. And it didn't apply to many southern states where they had to pass literacy tests. They had to answer how many bubbles were in a bar of soap. They had to count how many balls were in a jar. All of these things, right? Here is the part. Yeah, so somebody else is raising. We need to realize that as a community, we are grounded in someone else's house that we built, that we have a birthright to have access to because we built it. We can get our own place, but also the comment went off, but also we know that this is ours. And I think that some of what you see is this righteous indignation around having to forego something that I know we built. And that is a real challenge for many of us. It's like, why should we have to do anything when you aren't just accommodating us? You're giving us what we deserve, which is access, and it hasn't even been fair access. I don't even know what this means. We can strike that. What does this mean? You can't put this on young people trying to do something for themselves. I don't know. Black leadership industrial complex is a term where you think you're sounding smarter than you are, with all due respect. It's probably some shade that's unnecessary. We need to not be divided in this moment at all. So we can move on from that. I want to go to our podcast co-host, who was on CNN last night, and he said something that I think is really important for us to pay attention to. I also, Derek, if we have it, the tweet that accompanied it, I'd love to put that tweet up after this clip rolls, because someone had something to say that was a little off base. Let's roll the clip of Bakari.
He fell asleep in 1896 and woke up today in 2026. They would simply say the only difference is now Negroes have a TV show and we wear nice suits. They swapped out Klan hoods for Brooks Brothers suits. And that is the problem. I mean, Plessy v. Ferguson was 7-1, and it gave birth to 50 years of Jim Crow. What we have with this court right now, what we're seeing is watching people who have fought and died and bled so that we would have access to the ballot box, so that we would have access to our voices being heard in Congress, being ripped away. And I think that there is a casual laughter from people we believe to be our friends on the right who are showing us true colors today, because the most sacred, or one of the most sacred acts you have in the United States of America is the ability to cast a ballot and elect someone and send them to Congress, the State House, or a mayoral seat that represents your interest. And now black folks throughout the South are being silenced. And I don't find that to be a laughing matter.
The truer words have not ever been spoken. What I think is important here is Russell Honore, again, when he was testifying before the Louisiana Senate Committee, he said, sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong. And he cited the very same case that Bakari just did in this video. He talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, a case that happened in Louisiana, right? So here's what this man tweeted. I don't know who Thomas is, but he says, if someone fell asleep in 1896 and woke up today, they would see the only difference is now Black Americans have TV shows and wear nice suits. He has that in quotes. That's not exactly what Bakari said. He said Negroes, but I appreciate Thomas, I guess, for not saying that. They swapped out Klan hoods for Brooks Brothers suits. Horribly divisive rhetoric, he says, from Bakari Sellers on CNN tonight. What's fascinating to me, Thomas, let's leave the tweet up. What's fascinating to me is it's not Bakari's rhetoric, which actually are facts, that are the problem here. The problem here, Thomas, are the actions that the Supreme Court took to strip away the voting power and the voting rights of a people, dialing our rights back multiple generations. That is the real problem here. So I want to look at something that might help Thomas to just understand a little bit. I want us to look at these maps. So today already, we've talked about Alabama. We've talked about Louisiana. We've talked about, we didn't talk about Tennessee. We haven't talked about South Carolina or Mississippi. We've not seen proposed maps yet from South Carolina South Carolina or Mississippi, but we have seen Alabama. Alabama is saying they want to go back to the map that existed before. That's what the Supreme Court is allowing. So the current map is what you see here on the right, where Terry Sewell and Shamari Figures have districts that proportionally represent Black communities. The proposed map is how things were before. There's not a huge difference in how the lines are drawn. The huge difference is the racism that would seek to silence the voice of a community in Alabama. When we go to Louisiana, you see there is a long line down the middle of the state. Well, part of the issues around representation, particularly and actually not just in the South, y'all, in every community, is where people can afford to live. So if we're going to hit geographical lines being drawn and how you balance that with the representational needs of a community, you also have to deal with property tax. You also have to deal with the costs that are rising every single day, causing communities to be gentrified. Those are things that should be taken into consideration when drawing maps. So again, what we're dealing with here is either Troy Carter or Cleo Fields will be drawn out of the district, their districts, one of them, or worst case, both of them. But the Louisiana State Senate and House have until June 1st to come up with and present these new maps, despite the fact, again, y'all, that the election is Saturday. This is Tennessee. Tennessee just changed their map. What you see here is not a lot of change. There are some slight changes being made. We're not seeing like a singular line and a bubble at the end like a lollipop district. You're seeing some maps here that don't really look that different. The difference is that Black people won't be represented in the district as adopted. Right? That's the problem that we have. That is the problem that we have. So I think that when we consider where we are, we have to think about the tools we have. Legislatively, there aren't that many tools left, particularly in state houses and state senates in the South, because Black people aren't in the majority. Democrats aren't in the majority. Overwhelmingly, Black people are Democrats. So being able to change things legislatively, not really going to happen. There are procedural things they can do. There are bills that people can introduce. You think about the litigation approach, the legal strategy. Sure, we can sue. But if you go the way of the federal court, you have to get to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is being very clear. They're not supporting what it takes for Black people to be represented. They are supporting Black disenfranchisement in the Supreme Court, arguing that it is partisan. And either way, the court is supposed to be apolitical. So they should be doing what's right by the people, by the whole of the people. Not what's happening right now at all. They are doing quite the opposite. So when we talk about a legal strategy, that is also very challenging. I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be a legal record, that we should not force the Supreme Court to rely on what is said in Milligan around Alabama, to rely on what is said in past precedent in some of these cases before Shelby versus Holder, right? Around representational needs, around how we interpret the Voting Rights Act. Not suggesting we don't push, but I'm saying that those options, it's starting to look like we're foreclosing on those options and they're limited. So we're talking about now where the South used to go to get protection was the federal government. The federal government is also compromised. One, Democrats and therefore Black people are not the majority in the House, are not the majority in the Senate. We have the Trump administration. You cannot go to the Department of Justice that is now working overtime for white men in the Civil Rights Division to go get protection. They're not going to protect us. So where we normally turn to in the South was to the Fed, the federal government for protection. Can't go there. So we're out on the law. We're out on legislation. We're out on the federal government and any protections there. What do we have left? What do we have left? Dare, you can keep putting these comments up. But what do we have left? Our money. We have our money. The last thing that we can hold on to is an economic boycott, economic buy-ins, supporting our businesses, but protesting and punishing those who aren't doing right by us. There are multinational corporations based in Tennessee, based in Mississippi, based in South Carolina, based in Alabama, based in Texas, because we skipped over Texas. Texas was the case study. Based in Missouri, skipped over Missouri, skipped over Indiana. There are places that we can go to say we are going to withhold our dollar because you have withheld our respect. So you don't get our money. You don't get our money. We will withhold our dollar, support our own, build infrastructure around our own because you don't respect it. You haven't said a mumbling word. Here's a comment. Why are we fighting tooth and nail to live in a home where we have not been welcomed for centuries? At this point, I don't want access to their house in hell. I'm building my own home in salvation. Well, I'd love to know where your home is. Very curious about that. But we, people, again, we're going for what we know. There's a system that we have poured our life, sweat, blood, and tears into, and it's going to be hard to release that. It just is. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be actively building something. We should be actively building something, but we stay talking about what we should be doing, and I have yet to see a plan. Where's the plan? Where's the plan? I'm good with rapid response. I know my skill set. I know what I'm gifted at. I'm down was raised with supporting Black businesses. Not my issue at all. Down for the cause. But y'all who want to build your other thing, let's build it. How you going to get veterans benefits? What's your plan to make sure people can eat? Where your kids going to school? Right? You want to live in a house here? You want to stay here? Where are you paying your property taxes? When the feds come for their money for taxes around tax return time, where are you going to send the money? Are you paying into a whole separate system as well? Are you trying to go to another part of the world? What is the real plan? I hear us talking, but I don't know if we're really saying much. Yes, I just started talking about that. Sean, the beekeeper, says, afternoon, Angela, can you elaborate a bit on what you would like to see us Black folks to combat? I think him thinking means to say Black folks do to combat what's happening now. We have to withhold our dollar. We've got to identify businesses in each of these states who have been silent or worse, supportive. And in their silence or their support, because the silence is complicity, that is indirect support. In their silence or their support, they have to respect us. If they don't respect us, we withhold our money. It is time out for us to say, what is my little shopping trip going to do? What is my little oil change going to do? What is my little purchase of said car going to do? It does a lot when we all stick together. And I also think we have to talk about our kids going to these schools to earn them all of this money. And by the way, NIL is a new thing, so they're just now starting to get paid for that. But they're earning these schools all this money. Where are the schools on these things? School leadership hasn't said word the first. Are our kids safe going into the Jim Crow South to play sports at your institution, where you no longer want to teach them in African American studies or give them books that they should read to understand more about themselves and their history? Are our kids safe in the Confederacy? I don't know that they are. I would argue they are not. And I'm going to tell y'all this, not so controversial opinion. If this was an anti-Semitic issue and there were Jewish children on their way to these schools that have been silent on something anti-Semitic, what do you think would happen with that community? They would come together. They would stand together. Those kids would not be in those schools. What will it take for us to get there? To give kids an alternative, to push them towards schools in the Northwest, in the Northeast, in the Midwest. Midwest is problematic a little bit too. We just talked about Indiana, Missouri, also trying to get rid of seats. Congressman Cleaver's, Congressman Andre Carson's. We got some work to do. But in the meantime, we got to go because this has gone a little long today. But I do want y'all thinking about what is next for our people. I do want y'all thinking about what a strategic, sustained boycott looks like. I do want you to understand that it can start small and grow. But what we can't do is keep looking at this, saying it's a shame and waiting for that shame to knock on your front door. Once it knocks on your front door, it's too late. Welcome home, y'all.
Nobody knows the troubles I've seen,